Kohana had never been a man to hesitate when someone asked for help. His people knew him as quiet, steady, and loyal as the earth beneath their horses' hooves. So when his friend Matthew wrote from his ranch near Sagebrush Ridge, saying he was bedridden from a fall and needed someone trustworthy to collect his mail-order bride from the station, Kohana agreed without a moment's pause. He thought it would be a simple duty. A short ride. A polite greeting. An escort home. Nothing more. But the West had a habit of twisting the plans of men who thought they understood their path. He rode into Sagebrush Town just before noon, his horse kicking up little swirls of dust as the heat shimmered above the roofs. The station platform bustled with families greeting returning sons, ranch hands loading freight, and travelers stepping down stiff-legged from the train. Kohana dismounted, tying his horse, scanning the crowd for a woman holding a carpetbag and wearing the shy nerves most mail-order brides carried. Expected one woman, he did not expect two. First thing he noticed was the stillness that came over him, a rare pause in the noise of the world. Two young women stepped down from the train, one adjusting her gloves with a nervous, proper grace, the other taking in the landscape with bright, curious eyes like she was drinking the horizon itself. Sisters, clearly. Yet so different they looked as though the Creator had shaped them from opposite winds. The proper one blonde, tidy, posture perfect, must be Evelyn, he thought. The bride. But it was the other woman who seized his attention so sharply it felt like a hand closing around his chest. Taller than her sister, her hair a storm of dark waves tumbling loose from the train ride, she stepped onto Western soil with the stance of someone who refused to be small. Her dress was simple, but the way she carried herself made it look finer. There was a defiance in her chin, a spark in her eyes, a weary bravery in the way she held her carpetbag as if it contained every secret she'd fought to keep safe. Kohana didn't believe in love at first sight, but he believed in recognition when the world pointed you toward someone before your mind realized why, and looking at the second sister Lila, he felt that strange pull, deep and sudden, as though fate had reached down and tilted his face toward hers. He shook the feeling off. Matthew's bride mattered here, not the woman who made his heartbeat stumble like a novice rider in a saddle too big for him. Kohana approached the platform. Evelyn noticed him first. She blinked, startled, then gave a polite, hopeful smile. "Are you the man Matthew sent?" she asked. Before he could answer, Lila stepped between them, not rudely, but with the instinct of someone used to protecting her sister from the world. "And you are—" Her voice was smooth but edged, like honey poured over a blade. "Kohana," he said. "Matthew is my friend. He asked me to bring his bride safely to his ranch." Evelyn straightened even more, clasping her gloved hands. "Then we're in your care. Thank you for coming." Kohana nodded, but his eyes flicked to Lila again. She watched him calmly, but not shyly. Not afraid. More like she was assessing whether he was the kind of man who kept his promises or the kind who broke them. Without blinking, he realized, with a strange jolt, that he wanted to pass whatever silent test she was giving him. The train whistled behind them, preparing for departure. People dispersed. Kohana took the sisters' luggage, guiding them off the platform. Evelyn moved with small, careful steps. But Lila walked like the West already belonged to her. "What brings you both here?" Kohana asked without thinking. Evelyn opened her mouth to answer, but Lila cut in. "Family reasons." Evelyn shot her a warning look. Lila pretended not to see it. There it was again, that instinct to shield her sister. "But from what?" Kohana didn't press. He wasn't here to judge their past, only to deliver one of them to a man waiting with hope in his heart, still. As they approached the horses and Lila met his gaze with a flicker of restless daring, Kohana sensed something he couldn't shake. He had come for his friend's bride, But destiny had placed the wrong sister in his path. First, the trail out of Sagebrush Town stretched long and golden beneath the rising afternoon sun, the dust drifting behind the horses like thin smoke. Kohana led the way, though every so often he glanced back at the sisters riding behind him, partly out of duty, partly out of a growing curiosity he hadn't felt in years. Evelyn rode with her hands tight on the reins, back straight, boots barely fitting the stirrups. She looked exactly as a mail-order bride should look, polite, proper, visibly nervous about stepping into a life built from letters and promises. But Lila rode like she had done it since birth. She leaned forward with a confidence that didn't match the primness of their Eastern clothes. Her eyes tracked every shift of the land-cloud shadows over the hills. Deer prints near the brush, a hawk circling overhead as if she was cataloging the West and claiming it as her own in her mind. She was the kind of woman who didn't shy away from the unknown. No, she ran toward it. Kohana tried to ignore the way that pulled at him. But ignoring Lila was like ignoring a fire burning 10 feet away. They stopped at a stream to water the horses. Evelyn daintily stepped down, steadying herself on a rock, careful not to muddy her boots. But Lila hopped off without hesitation, landing in the dust with a soft thud, brushing her hair from her cheek with a quick, impatient sweep. "You've been west before," Kohana said before thinking. Lila looked at him, one eyebrow lifted. "Why do you say that? You sit a horse like someone who belongs here." For a moment, something warm flickered across her face, surprise, maybe even pleasure, but she masked it quickly. "Maybe I just learned fast." Evelyn approached quietly, her voice calm but lined with worry. "Lila, don't wander too far." Lila smiled at her sister, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "I'll be right here." Right here. Yet somehow, Kohana sensed she was 1,000 miles away on the inside. As the horses drank, Kohana crouched by the stream, cupping cool water to his face. He overheard the sisters whispering behind him. "Shouldn't have come," Evelyn murmured. "We shouldn't have. We didn't have a choice," Lila whispered back, sharp but gentle. "You know that." Kohana felt the instinct to turn, to ask, but he stayed still. Their business wasn't his, not yet. When they mounted again, the sun dipped lower, shadows lengthening across the dirt road. The silence between them shifted, not tense, not easy. Something in between. "You said Matthew is your friend," Evelyn finally said, trying to keep her voice steady. What kind of man is he?" "A good one," Kohana answered simply. "Quiet, hard-working. He'll treat you with respect." Evelyn nodded. But the relief that should have shown didn't. Instead, her shoulders tightened. Her eyes fixed forward as if bracing against something coming. "That's good to know." Lila, riding beside her, cut in softly. "It'll be fine, Evie." But her tone wasn't convincing, even to her. A gust of wind swept across the plains, rustling the grass like distant whispers. Kohana studied them again. Two sisters, close as branches of the same tree. Yet something about them didn't align. One was fearful, the other guarded. Together, they seemed to be carrying a burden too heavy for luggage alone. He rode closer, his horse matching theirs. "Your journey was long?" "Long enough," Lila replied lightly, though her grip on the reins tightened. "We appreciate your help," Evelyn added quickly, as if trying to keep the peace or steer the conversation away. But Kohana wasn't here to interrogate. He was here to escort, to protect. Still, every instinct in him whispered that there was a story beneath the surface, something pressing, something urgent. The sisters didn't just come west. They fled something. By the time they reached the first ridge overlooking the open plains, the sky was turning amber. The wind grew cooler, and Lila slowed her horse to ride beside him. "You don't talk much," she said. Kohana glanced at her. I speak when needed. That's rare. She smirked. Most men talk to fill silence. Kohana kept his gaze ahead. Silence tells me more. She studied him, really studied him, as if she were peeling back layers. You're not like the men back east. Is that good or bad? She tilted her head, her hair swaying with the breeze. Not sure yet. But there was something else in her eyes, something she didn't say, something that made Kohana's pulse tighten in his chest. At that moment, Evelyn called out, Lila, please. Don't wander off. And just like that, the moment between them snapped. Kohana realized something clearly. The bride was Evelyn. But the woman who stirred trouble inside him was Lila, and trouble, he suspected, had only just begun. The trail narrowed as they left the open plains and moved into rolling country where piñon trees clung to the slopes and the wind whistled low through the canyons. The land grew wilder here, rougher, just like the shift in tension between the three travelers. What had started as a polite escort was slowly turning into a storm of unspoken truths, glances that lingered too long, and questions none of them were ready to face. Kohana kept his horse steady at the front, though he could feel Lila's energy like heat on his back. She rode behind him, too close for him to ignore, too confident for him to forget she was there. Evelyn, meanwhile, struggled to keep her nervous Mari under control, her rigid posture stiffening each time the animal jolted at a rustling sound. A dry branch snapped nearby. Evelyn startled. Lila clicked her tongue. Ease your grip. You're choking that poor horse. Evelyn didn't answer. Her knuckles had gone white. Kohana slowed until he rode beside her. Here. He reached out gently, adjusting the reins in her hands. Give her some slack. She'd trust you more if you trust her. Evelyn exhaled shakily. I'm trying. You're doing fine. But while he helped her, he sensed Lila watching him. When he looked her way, she didn't look embarrassed or apologetic for staring. No, Lila held his gaze with a steady, bold calm that sent a strange shiver down his spine. Like she saw more in him than he allowed others to notice. They continued on, but the trail soon narrowed so much they had to ride single file again. Evelyn took the middle position. Lila stayed at the back, and that was when trouble began. Lila's horse, a feisty young Mari the station master claimed was spirited, had been restless since they left town. Now, irritated by the confines of the path, the Mari nipped at Evelyn's horse. Evelyn squealed, jerking hard. Her horse reared. Kohana turned instantly. Hold steady. But before he could reach her, Lila's voice cut sharply across the canyon. Evelyn! Loosen your hands now. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command, and Evelyn obeyed instinctively, like a child who had grown up listening to Lila's warnings for survival. The tension broke. The horse dropped its front hoofs to the ground, snorting. Evelyn trembled, swallowing tears. Are you hurt? Kohana asked. She shook her head quickly, embarrassed. But Lila. Lila swung off her horse and marched forward, eyes blazing. Are you trying to get yourself killed? She snapped at her sister. Evelyn looked down, voice small. I didn't mean to. Well, meaning doesn't change the ground rushing toward your skull. Lila fired back. Kohana stepped between them. Enough. She didn't fall. Lila's anger flared toward him then. You weren't looking. That horse could have snapped her neck. Yet she's standing, Kohana said evenly. She's learning. The canyon wind went still. Lila stared at him, truly stared, as if testing to see if he'd bend under her heat. Kohana didn't flinch. Finally, Lila tore her gaze away, running a hand through her wild hair. Fine. We keep moving before the light goes. But the spark between them lingered, dangerous, silent, impossible to ignore. When they mounted again, the sisters didn't speak. Evelyn kept her eyes forward. Lila chewed at her bottom lip, frustration simmering beneath the surface. And Kohana felt, caught between them between duty to one woman and a growing pull toward the other. They crossed the ridge just as the sun dipped behind the mountains, painting the world in copper. Shadows stretched long and the air cooled. Perfect weather for travel. But the tension between them rode like a fourth companion. Lila urged her horse forward until she matched Kohana's pace. Her voice dropped low, softer than before. "I wasn't angry at you." He didn't believe her. "You sounded angry." She smirked faintly. "I get loud when I care." "And Evelyn?" "She doesn't understand the West. She thinks it behaves like polite society." "And you?" he asked. "Do you understand the West?" Lila looked out across the horizon. "I feel like the West understands me." Kohana's breath hitched. It was the kind of sentence spoken by someone who didn't fear the unknown, someone who belonged in wild places. She turned back to him, eyes shimmering with a restless fire. "Thank you for helping her." "I would have helped anyone," he replied. "Maybe," Lila murmured, tilting her head. "But I saw how fast you moved." Their horses brushed side by side. Their knees almost touched. The moment stretched, warm and dangerous, and then Evelyn called out timidly, "Kohana? Are we stopping soon?" The spell broke. He cleared his throat. "Yes, there's a homestead a mile ahead." Layla rode ahead, but not before giving him one last look over her shoulder. A look that felt like the beginning of trouble neither of them could outrun. By the time twilight draped the canyon in dusky purples and silvers, the tension on the trail had grown heavier, unspoken but unmistakable. The sisters rode close together now, their silence layered with things unsaid, and Kohana could feel it like the hum of electricity in the air before a storm. Lila rode slightly behind him, her posture tense but controlled, eyes flicking toward him every few moments as if she wanted to speak, then changed her mind. He knew the fire behind those eyes wasn't just attraction, there was something darker, something she had been carrying long before they met. Finally, unable to hold back, Kohana slowed his horse. He glanced over his shoulder at her. "You've been quiet," he said carefully. "Too quiet for someone with your spirit. What troubles you?" Leela's horse shifted beneath her. She glanced down, frowning, then looked up with a flash of mischief-masking worry. "Nothing," she said, her tone light, almost teasing. But there was a tremor beneath it, a shadow in her voice that made him pause. He knew lies when he heard them. Evelyn, riding between them, noticed the exchange. She tilted her head toward Lila, giving a small, pleading glance. "Layla," she whispered. But Lila only shook her head subtly, refusing to respond. The proper, careful Evelyn was afraid to confront her sister too harshly. Fearing the consequences of the truth Lila was hiding, Kohana studied her for a moment. Her eyes, so alive and alert, held secrets. He had escorted many women in his time, but Lila was unlike anyone he'd met. There was a strength in her restraint, a subtle tension in her fingers on the reins, a story she was not yet ready to tell. The canyon walls seemed to close around them as the evening shadows lengthened. The wind whistled through the pines, carrying the faint scent of sage and dust. "I know you're hiding something," Kohana said quietly, letting the words hang between them. "You don't have to tell me now, but know this, I can see it." Layla's jaw tightened. Her horse snorted and pawed at the ground impatiently. Finally, she leaned forward slightly. "You're clever," she admitted, "and stubborn." She hesitated, searching his eyes for judgment. Finding none, she whispered, "Evelyn? She's supposed to marry your friend." Kohana nodded. He had known that, but he waited. Lila swallowed hard, her voice dropping even lower. "But I'm the one who wanted to leave home. I've been running from something. Someone that might ruin everything if it catches up to us. Evelyn doesn't know. She thinks she's coming here for a safe life, but She trailed off, as if the admission was a wound she didn't want to reopen. Her gaze dropped to the reins in her hands. I'm the one carrying danger with me. Kohana's chest tightened. He wanted to say so many things, to tell her it would be all right, that he could protect her, but words weren't needed yet. He only nodded, understanding the weight she bore. The silence between them grew comfortable, almost intimate. It was the kind of quiet that spoke louder than any confession. Evelyn, sensing the tension but not knowing its cause, tried to break it with polite conversation. The homestead should be just over the next ridge, she said softly, her voice cautious, like a diplomat in a room of volatile secrets. Lila didn't respond. She stared ahead, jaw tight, mind elsewhere. And Kohana realized that the proper, careful bride beside him had no idea the world she was stepping into was already complicated. Dangerous and unpredictable. As they rode, Kohana felt the invisible pull of Lila's presence beside him. She moved with a freedom and confidence that defied the dangers of the West. She had the courage to face storms, the instinct to survive, and a heart that dared to feel everything deeply, even when it was forbidden. He realized that escorting a bride was supposed to be a simple task. But the West had a way of teaching lessons in ways a man never expected. And Kohana's heart already knew that the path before him was no longer a matter of duty, it was a test of choice. Twilight deepened, painting the canyon in violet and silver, and the first stars peeked through the darkening sky. Layla's eyes caught his one last time before she looked away, shadowed by secrets, pride, and a hint of defiance. Kohana's pulse quickened. He understood one undeniable truth. No matter the promise he had made to his friend, no matter the duty he carried, the woman beside him was more than a complication. She was the spark that would ignite everything. The wrong sister who felt like the only right one. The trail wound onward, leading them into the unknown. And Kohana knew that, with Lila riding beside him, nothing in the West, no storm, no danger, no promise, would ever be simple again. The storm hit suddenly, as storms in the West often did, with little warning and no mercy. Clouds thickened overhead, dark as smoke, blotting out the last hints of sunset. The wind kicked up, whipping dust and loose leaves along the trail, rattling the branches and tossing the sisters' skirts around their boots. Kohana's instincts went sharp as lightning. He knew they needed shelter. Fast, a small, abandoned cabin appeared ahead. Tucked into the side of the ridge, its roof sagging and boards weathered by years of wind and sun. Kohana guided the horses toward it, the rain beginning to pelt down, cold and biting. They slid inside, shutting the splintered door against the storm. The sound of the wind outside suddenly muffled, but still threatening. Evelyn quickly removed her wet cloak, brushing her damp hair from her face. She looked exhausted, her hands shaking slightly from the ride and the storm. Kohana noted the careful, almost timid way she moved. Lila, however, laughed a short, wild sound that seemed to defy the dark sky. Her hair clung in wet waves to her face, and her eyes sparkled with something that frightened and intrigued him at once. She leaned close to her sister, steadying her, guiding her without hesitation. "You're shaking," Lila said softly, her hand brushing Evelyn's shoulder. "Relax, it's just a storm." Evelyn nodded but didn't respond. Kohana watched the exchange, his chest tight. There was a bond here he had not expected, protective, fierce, unspoken. And he realized Lila was the kind of woman who refused to be small, refused to shrink even in fear. The three of them gathered near the fire Kohana built quickly, the flames licking upward and casting warm light against the cabin walls. Evelyn sat quietly, staring into the flickering glow as if lost in her thoughts. Lila leaned close to Kohana, her presence undeniable. The air between them shifted, electric, dangerous, intimate. "You ride well," he said, breaking the silence. "Better than most men I've met." She smirked, but it didn't reach the softness of her eyes. "You think I'd let a horse tell me where to go?" Her boldness, her fire, stirred something in him he hadn't felt before. He wanted to reach out, to brush a wet strand of hair from her face, but he restrained himself. She was untamed, unpredictable, and he had promised his friend he would only deliver the bride. Not get distracted by the wrong sister, yet the warmth of the fire, the closeness of their shoulders almost touching, the sound of rain against the cabin roof, made restraint almost impossible. For the first time in his life, Kohana felt that desire to break rules, his own and those of the world around him. He wanted to step closer, to feel her hand, to close the space that seemed charged with silent electricity. Lila noticed him watching, her eyes catching his with that same daring spark. She leaned a fraction closer, testing the line he wasn't sure he wanted to hold. "You're quiet," she whispered. "Do you ever just let yourself feel?" He swallowed hard. His duty, his loyalty, his promise to Matthew all screamed at him to step back. And yet the pull toward her was magnetic, overwhelming. A force of the land itself, the mountains, the wind, the firelight, all conspiring to blur the lines he had sworn never to cross. Evelyn stirred in her sleep in the corner, and Kohana felt the sharp sting of reality. One step too far, one wrong move, and everything would unravel. His friend's bride would be endangered, and the fragile trust between the sisters might shatter completely. He moved a little away, the distance deliberate but aching. Lila's eyes followed him, her lips slightly parted, curiosity and desire mingling in the shadows of the firelight. The storm outside raged on, but the storm inside that cabin, the unspoken tension, the almost touch, the unacknowledged attraction was far fiercer. Finally, the first thunderclap shook the roof, startling them both. Kohana took a deep breath, steadying his pulse. Lila leaned back, though the flicker of challenge and heat in her gaze remained. Neither of them spoke again that night. Words would have ruined the fragile balance between restraint and temptation. The night dragged on, wind and rain battering the cabin walls. But Kohana stayed awake, keeping watch, aware of every small movement. Lila finally rested her head against the wall beside him, eyes wide open, a soft sigh escaping her lips. He didn't move, didn't speak. They had come dangerously close to crossing a line that could have changed everything. But they had not. And in that silence, with the storm raging outside and the fire's warmth between them, Kohana realized something undeniable. The wrong sister had claimed his heart, and no promise, no loyalty could extinguish the fire that had begun that night. The sun rose slow and red over Sagebrush Ridge, casting long shadows across the ranch that smelled of hay, leather, and earth warmed by morning light. Kohana rode toward the homestead with the sisters behind him, the horses' hooves crunching against the dirt path. He had hoped the ride would be calm, simple, a quiet return to fulfill a promise to his friend. But the events of the trail, the storm, the cabin, the silent electricity between him and Lila still lingered like embers in his chest. Matthew, his friend and the man waiting for a bride, stepped out onto the porch just as they approached. His eyes were bright with hope and curiosity, scanning the riders as they drew near. He caught sight of the sisters and his face broke into a wide, anticipatory smile. "Finally," he called, waving a hand. "I've been waiting for you both." Kohana's heart tightened. He knew this moment could be dangerous, not for him, but for the fragile balance they had maintained. The bride was supposed to be Evelyn, the proper, polite woman he had escorted safely. But Matthew's eyes immediately settled on Lila first. She had ridden slightly ahead of her sister that morning, bold and upright in the saddle, hair falling in dark waves around her face, eyes glinting with morning light. In that instant, Matthew's gaze seemed to lock on her. Kohana felt the shift in energy, the subtle panic rising in him. "Wait," Kohana said quietly, pulling the reins to slow his horse. But Matthew's excitement was too fast, too eager, to notice his hesitation. Lila froze for a heartbeat, realizing the man had mistaken her for Evelyn. Her pulse quickened, her heart hammering in sudden panic. She opened her mouth, intending to correct him, but something in the depth of her gaze made her hesitate. Kohana, sensing the danger, nudged his horse forward, closing the small distance between them. "Matthew," Kohana said firmly, voice calm but unyielding. "This is Evelyn." Matthew squinted, confused. His eyes moved from Lila to her sister, who had stayed a step behind, almost shrinking into herself. "Evelyn?" he asked cautiously. "But you look so different from—" Evelyn's cheeks flushed, embarrassment and fear mixing. She swallowed, unsure how to explain the confusion without causing chaos. Kohana dismounted quickly. Moving between Matthew and Lila, his presence was solid, unmovable, like a boulder against the current of misunderstanding. "Yes," he said. "Evelyn is your bride. She has been under my care since the station. Lila is her sister. She is not here for you." Layla's eyes, wide and expressive, darted between Kohana and her sister. Relief flooded her features, but so did frustration. She had wanted no part in the mistake. Yet part of her had wondered what it would feel like to be seen, truly seen, by a man who looked at her without pretense. Matthew ran a hand through his hair, trying to process the situation. I'm sorry," he said, finally turning to Evelyn. His expression softened, understanding dawning. "Evelyn, you're the one I wrote to." You thought wrong," Kohana said gently, still standing between them. "But all is well. No harm done." Evelyn nodded, feeling a mix of gratitude and lingering fear. She had never been the center of such drama before, and now the quiet calm she had expected in her new life seemed far away. Kohana's gaze moved to Lila. She stood tall, defiant, the fire in her eyes not dimmed by the confusion. Something about her made him ache. The wrong sister, the woman who had captured his thoughts on the trail, who had ridden beside him through the storm, who had kept him awake in that cabin with her presence so close it had almost shattered his resolve. Matthew, still blinking in disbelief, finally relaxed. "Well," he said, rubbing his chin, "it seems things aren't always as straightforward as a letter says." Kohana nodded, feeling the tension ease slightly. But inside, he knew this moment was a turning point. The ride was over, the bride delivered safely, but the wrong sister, the one who had stirred every pulse in him, who had tested him, who had defied him and yet captivated him completely, was here. She was real. She was untamed. And Kohana's heart had no intention of ignoring her. Lila, sensing his eyes, met them without flinching. For a fleeting moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them, silent and charged. Kohana understood, as he had all along, that the West had delivered him not the task he expected, but the woman he had been destined to find. And in that instant, he knew the lines between duty and desire would soon have to be redrawn. Asterisk. The morning after the arrival at the ranch felt heavier than the sunrise itself. Kohana woke before the first light, stepping outside to the chill that crept across the homestead. The wind carried the faint scent of sage and hay, but it could not mask the turmoil in his chest. He had delivered the bride safely, fulfilled the promise he had made to his friend Matthew, but the wrong sister, the one who haunted his thoughts and quickened his pulse, lingered in his mind with relentless insistence. Lila, her name alone pulled at him. A tether he could neither cut nor ignore. He found her near the stables, brushing down a horse with a practiced hand, eyes focused but alert, every movement deliberate, alive with unspoken defiance. She looked up when she noticed him, a flicker of curiosity and challenge in her gaze. The wind teased her hair, and for a moment, Kohana thought the world had shrunk to the distance between them. "Morning," he said, voice low but steady. "Morning," she replied, though her tone carried a hint of amusement, a teasing lightness that belied the tension that had grown between them on the trail. Kohana studied her, measuring his next words. He had sworn loyalty to Matthew, had promised to escort the bride, and yet every fiber of him rebelled at the thought of leaving Lila behind. She was untamed, fierce, alive in a way that both unsettled and enthralled him. Duty whispered, but desire roared louder. "I need to speak with you," he said, finally breaking the silence. She paused, tilting her head, eyes narrowing. "About what?" He hesitated. How could he frame the truth without shattering everything? "About U.S. About this moment, this place. I was sent to bring someone home, but you've claimed more than I expected." Her lips curved into a small, knowing smile. "I figured as much." Kohana took a step closer. The horses shifted uneasily, sensing the intensity between them. "I cannot pretend I am indifferent to you," he admitted. "I cannot ignore what I feel, even though it breaks a promise I swore to my friend. But I will not cannot deny the truth any longer." Lila's eyes softened, but the defiance remained. "Kohana, you've sworn your word. Matthew's bride is not me. If you choose me, you betray him." "I know," he said quietly, gaze steady on hers. "I know, and it pains me more than words can bear. But staying silent, pretending nothing stirs between us, that would be a lie. And I will not live a lie." She studied him, searching for hesitation, for any trace of doubt. There was none. Only honesty, raw and unflinching, and a depth of feeling that mirrored her own. The air between them crackled with unspoken acknowledgment. They had both felt it since the moment he had seen her on the platform. Through the storm, the narrow trails, the long, tense nights. "I never expected this," she whispered, voice low and almost reverent. "I never thought I could matter to someone like you." "You matter more than you realize," he said, reaching out instinctively. His fingers hovered near hers, uncertain, restrained, as though the air itself might punish a rash step. "More than anything I have promised. More than any duty or word." The wind picked up again, rattling the barn doors, tossing hay across the ground. Lila's chest rose and fell with measured breaths, and finally, as if the world had shifted its axis just for them, she stepped closer. Their hands brushed, the contact brief but electric, sending a shock through both of them. Kohana swallowed hard. "I choose you," he said, steady and unwavering. "I will no longer pretend that my heart belongs anywhere else." Her lips parted, surprise and relief mingling in her expression. You would risk everything for me?" "I would risk anything," he said, "because no promise is worth more than the truth I feel. And you? You are worth every risk." The barn doors rattled again, the wind outside echoing their confession. Kohana and Lila stood there, side by side, aware that the world beyond them still held responsibilities, still held Matthew's expectations, still held danger. But for the first time, they were no longer defined by duty alone. They were defined by each other. Kohana's gaze met hers, steady, unwavering, filled with a promise of his own making. Lila's breath caught. Neither spoke again immediately, words unnecessary. The choice had been made, clear and irrevocable. The wrong sister was no longer wrong. She was the only one who mattered, and in that silent acknowledgment, a new journey began, one that neither could predict, but one they would face together, unflinching, untamed, and undeniably theirs. The morning air was crisp and golden over Sagebrush Ridge, carrying the scent of pine, sage, and the faint tang of adventure that never truly left the West. Kohana rode toward the open fields with Lila beside him, the wind catching her dark hair and tugging gently at the edges of her simple dress. The weight of promises broken and choices made pressed lightly on his mind, but it no longer mattered. The world had shifted. He had chosen her, and she had chosen him against expectation, against duty, against every careful plan that had existed before this moment. Matthew watched from the porch, standing tall despite surprise still etched on his face. He had understood at last that the bride he had been waiting for was Evelyn, who had stepped forward shyly but with quiet dignity, her hand clasped in his. Matthew smiled, a little rueful, a little relieved. It had been confusing, perhaps even awkward, but he recognized that the West had its own way of arranging hearts, and the right connections could not be forced by letters or promises. Kohana's gaze swept over Lila as they approached, the early sunlight glinting off her eyes, highlighting the determination and fire that had held him captive since the platform in Sagebrush Town. She was untamed, unpredictable, alive in ways that the carefully charted life of letters and expectations could never match. And in that moment, he knew fully, with the certainty of the land itself, that she had always been the one meant for him. As they dismounted, Lila's eyes found his, and she smiled soft, real, and unguarded. Kohana stepped closer, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering just a moment too long, just as her hand instinctively reached to rest over his. The connection between them was no longer silent. It was shared, undeniable, and binding in a way that words could only attempt to capture. Evelyn, standing beside Matthew, observed the exchange quietly, a gentle smile on her lips. She understood now that life had a way of placing people where they were truly meant to be, and that sometimes the unexpected, the bold, and the untamed carried more truth than carefully written letters ever could. She stepped forward, greeting the couple with warmth. And even though the path had been tangled and confusing, she radiated forgiveness and acceptance, her presence easing the tension that had hung between the riders since the station. Kohana turned back to Lila, feeling the steady strength in her gaze, a mirror of his own feelings. The ride, the storm, the quiet nights, the near dangers all had led them to this point. He reached for her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers, the gesture simple. Yet it carried the weight of every mile, every choice, every pulse of his heart along the trail. "I never expected this," Lila whispered, voice soft but steady. "I never thought anyone could see me like you do." "I don't just see you," Kohana said, voice low and sure. "I understand you. I have since the moment you stepped off that train, and I will follow you wherever the trail leads, no matter how wild it gets." She smiled, a mixture of relief, pride, and the quiet joy of recognition. For the first time in her life, she did not need to hide, to hold back, or to run. The West had tested her, threatened her, and challenged her, but it had also delivered what she had longed for without ever knowing it. Kohana was the one who had seen through the fire, the spirit, the heart she had kept hidden, and he had chosen her in return. The horses shifted beneath them, impatient to move, and the sun climbed higher, spilling light across the wide open plains. Kohana and Lila mounted together, side by side, hands brushing as they settled into the rhythm of the ride. Behind them, Evelyn and Matthew followed at a gentler pace. The chaos of the mistaken identities, fears, and storms already fading into memory. As they rode across the ridge, the horizon stretched endlessly before them, a canvas of possibilities. The West was vast and untamed, but in each other, Kohana and Lila had found the certainty that neither duty nor expectation could provide. Every mile was theirs to claim, every sunrise theirs to share, and every storm theirs to face together. For Kohana, the right sister had never been the one expected. For Lila, the man she had touched and tamed with her spirit was exactly who she had been waiting for. Even if she did not know it at first thought and in the golden light of morning, riding side by side across the endless plains, they both understood the undeniable truth. The wrong sister had been nothing more than fate's first test. And the one they had chosen, the one they were meant for, would ride with them forever. The West stretched wide before them, wild and free, but now so were their hearts.